A wave of pain crashed over Anna like a storm breaking through a fragile window, sharp, blinding, and utterly consuming. She grasped the cold marble of the kitchen island, her knuckles whitening as though the grip itself could anchor her against the agony surging inside her. "Vince, something's wrong." She forced the words past the walls of panic, trembling, gasping into the phone. I know, it's happening." On the other end, a sigh answered her. Not a sigh of concern, but the hollow sound of habitual detachment, the kind she'd grown to dread with every fiber of her being. "Annie, relax. You're not due for another 2 weeks. It's probably just Braxton Hicks. Take a Tylenol. Number." This wasn't Braxton Hicks. Another contraction stole her breath, forcing a whimper she couldn't control. "This is different. It's really bad." Her voice trembled, breaking under the weight of fear. "I've never begged you for anything, Vince, but please, I'm scared. Look, I can't just drop everything for every little twinge." His voice was hardening now, smooth and cold, a blade wrapped in silk. "This conference in Miami is critical. The keynote is in 2 hours." She froze, memories slicing through her panic with the cruel precision of truth. There was no conference. His golf clubs had been in the trunk of his Porsche, and the weekender bag from Louis Vuitton, the one she had never seen, was all the evidence of a fabricated story. But her strength had drained, leaving nothing but the raw edges of fear and desperation. "Call an ambulance, Vince, please." Her legs trembled violently. The phone grew impossibly heavy. Then, click, silence. The dial tone buzzed, final and merciless. He was gone. It wasn't just a dropped call. It was the cutting of the final chord, a declaration of indifference, a confirmation that she was entirely alone. Tears streaked her cheeks, hot and bitter, as another jag of pain racked her body. His child, she thought, collapsing inward. His child, too. How could he? Her phone slipped from her slick fingers, clattering against the polished hardwood as she sank to the floor, her body screaming in protest. Shaking, she dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" came the calm, professional voice. "Please," she managed between sharp gasps. "I think I'm in labor. I'm alone." Her voice fractured, each word a shard of desperation. She recited her address with trembling precision, the sterile gated community that had always felt more like a gilded cage than a home now looming in her mind as a hollow, indifferent backdrop to her suffering. The world began to tilt, her vision blurred, darkening at the edges, closing into a narrow tunnel. The operator's voice faded, becoming distant, hollow, unreal, and then relief. Sharp and strange. The pain receded. There was only darkness, only the gentle float of peace, serene and encompassing. For the first time in hours, she could breathe without the knife of agony in her chest. 256. Dr. Evans entered the ICU quietly, his loafers squeaking faintly on the pristine floor, the only disturbance in a room suspended in tension and artificial light. He approached the bed where Anna lay, pale, fragile, her body a map of suffering against the stark white of sheets and tangled wires. The monitors blinked a rhythm he had come to read as code. His brow furrowed. Turning to the nurse standing vigil, he asked softly, "Any change, Nina?" "Nah," she replied, shaking her head, her kind, worn face etched with concern. "None, doctor. Vitals are stable, but she's completely unresponsive. So young, breaks your heart." He gave a solemn nod, lingering a moment on her still, fragile form before exiting the room. Minutes later, he found Nina at the nurse's station, glasses perched haphazardly on her head. "Nah, we need to get a hold of this young woman's husband or any family. She's in a medically induced coma. The next 24 hours are critical, and we need a serious conversation with him. "I was just about to, Dr. Evans," she said, picking up Anna Hayes's chart. Her squint at the emergency contact info was comically earnest. She really needed a chain for those glasses. Still, the digits were legible enough to dial. Finger hovering over the last two numbers. A 9 or a 0? She pressed it firmly, hope and anxiety fighting in her chest. The line rang twice. A man's voice answered, "This is Andrew." "Good afternoon," Na began, balancing authority with gentleness. "I'm calling from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Your wife, Anna Hayes, was admitted to our maternity ward earlier today. The delivery was complicated. She's currently in the ICU, and we felt you should be here." A profound silence stretched across the line. Not shock, not grief, confusion, hesitation. Finally he spoke, tasting the name aloud. "Anna Hayes." "Yes. My wife is—" Another pause. "All right," he said slowly. "I'm on my way." Na hung up, letting out a small, frustrated huff. "Men these days," she muttered, "act like they don't even know their wives are pregnant. Kids. No sense of responsibility." Meanwhile, miles away, Andrew Cole stared at the Chicago skyline, the city sprawling beneath him through floor-to-ceiling windows. The call had landed like a hammer blow, waking memories he had long tried to bury. Anna, in a hospital, giving birth. Impossible. He hadn't spoken to her in 5 years, not since the day she had announced she was marrying Vince, his so-called friend who had laughed and claimed victory over Andrew, a trophy taken with cruel precision. Andrew had loved Anna since their teenage years, neighbors in Lincoln Park, best friends, confidants. He had assumed naturally that their future was intertwined. Then Vince had entered, charming, reckless, competitive, and ultimately victorious, stealing her heart in the same way he had once challenged Andrew to a game only he knew the rules to. And now Anna, in distress, had inadvertently listed a number from the past, a number that had come back to him, a lifeline he didn't hesitate to grasp. The car roared along Lakeshore Drive, Andrew's Audi cutting through traffic, a familiar skyline looming like a silent witness to the past and the present colliding. Memories flashed in the rearview mirror of bitter arguments and youthful fights, Vince taunting, Andrew protective, fists thrown, pride wounded, and a prophecy uttered in venom. "You're going to regret this, man. I'm taking her from you just to prove a point." 2 weeks later, the prophecy fulfilled. Anna's "I'm so sorry" had shattered him, and he had fled to Austin, nursing heartbreak into ambition, building wealth, influence, and strength. And now he was returning, not as the boy he had been, but as a man capable of moving mountains for the woman he had never stopped loving. Andrew Cole navigated the chaotic whirl of the hospital parking garage with a singular focus, each turn and ramp leading him closer to the ICU, where Anna Hayes, the woman who had once been the center of his world, fought for her life. The city's noise faded into a low hum, replaced by the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat, echoing like a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. Every memory of Anna flared within him, her laugh like sunlight filtering through autumn leaves, the way she had always challenged him, her eyes sparking with defiance and warmth at once. And now, she was here, fragile and alone, and Vince, the man who had stolen everything Andrew had assumed was his destiny, was nowhere to be found, leaving a void that only he could fill. He pulled into the emergency entrance, leaving the engine running as he sprinted across the slick pavement, the winter wind biting at his cheeks, each step fueled by a mixture of rage, worry, and unshakable determination. Inside the hospital, the sterile scent of antiseptic and the constant hum of machinery formed a backdrop to Andrew's urgency. The receptionist barely had time to glance at him before he announced himself, voice taut with the tension of a man who had seen too much loss to tolerate any delay. "I'm here for Anna Hayes, ICU." Now the woman's eyes widened at the intensity in his gaze, sensing that this was not a man accustomed to waiting, not a man to be placated with bureaucracy. Moments later, Dr. Evans appeared, the same calm authority that had guided so many through crisis, now meeting Andrew with a mix of curiosity and guarded optimism. "You're Andrew Cole?" Evans asked, his tone courteous, yet tinged with the gravity of the situation. "Yes," Andrew said, his voice steady, controlled, each word carrying the weight of history, love, and a promise of protection. The corridor to the ICU seemed endless, each step echoing in the antiseptic silence, until the room appeared at the end like a sanctuary and a battlefield merged into one. There she was, Anna, pale and still beneath the tangle of white sheets, a fragile silhouette illuminated by the soft glow of monitors and the muted daylight filtering through the blinds. Machines beeped in precise, calming rhythms, each sound a testament to life suspended between danger and recovery. Andrew paused for a moment, allowing himself to take in the sight, every detail etched into memory. The curve of her jaw, the slight furrow of her brow, the gentle rise and fall of her chest beneath the hospital gown. Despite the tubes, the wires, the coldness of the room, she was unmistakably Anna, the same woman he had loved, feared losing, and now vowed to protect at any cost. He approached the bed, hand outstretched, hesitating only a fraction of a second before gently taking hers, feeling the fragile warmth, the tremor that betrayed both fear and relief. "She's stable for now," Dr. Evans said, his voice measured, carrying both reassurance and caution. "But the next 24 hours are critical. She's unresponsive, and frankly, the situation could have been worse if she hadn't received immediate attention." Andrew nodded, absorbing every word, already calculating the steps needed to ensure Anna's safety, her comfort, and the life of the child she had just brought into the world. He listened as Nana, ever vigilant and maternal, detailed the initial emergency call, the mistaken number, the absence of the actual father. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, flicked between Andrew and the monitors, reading the situation with decades of experience. She had seen neglect, arrogance, and indifference in countless families over her 30 years. Yet something about this, about him, spoke of a man willing to defy those patterns, to rise above the failures of others and claim responsibility where it mattered most. Andrew's mind raced. Vince, floating somewhere in the tropics, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, had abandoned his wife in the moment she needed him most. The call from Na, the sight of Anna's fragile form, the weight of history, all of it converged into a single, undeniable conclusion. He would take charge. He would be the father. He would be the husband, if only in action, until the very walls of circumstance could be rewritten. With a single decision, he promised himself that every resource, every ounce of influence, every cent he had amassed over the past 5 years would be deployed to secure Anna's survival and well-being. There would be no compromise, no half measures. He would move mountains, summon specialists, and ensure that the child, Katie, would be cradled in security and love, the way a father and a mother would wish, whether biology dictated it or not. He made the calls, arranging for specialized medication that was otherwise denied by insurance, securing a private room that offered warmth and dignity, summoning a renowned specialist from Johns Hopkins who would cross state lines if necessary. Andrew's authority was absolute, his presence in the hospital a force that shifted the tides in Anna's favor. Each decision, each instruction, each command carried with it the silent acknowledgement of past mistakes, heartbreak, and unspoken devotion. The nurses, sensing the intensity behind his calm, executed his directions with precision, the hospital machinery bending for a moment to the singular will of a man who would not allow negligence or indifference to dictate the life of the woman he had never stopped loving. Throughout the next 24 hours, Andrew did not leave her side. The world outside faded into irrelevance. He brought food she could tolerate, coffee that arrived at the exact moment her exhaustion became unbearable, magazines and tablets loaded with distraction and comfort. He sat quietly, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes merely holding her hand, letting the steady presence of his own body become a shield against the chaos and vulnerability that had enveloped her. When Anna stirred, when her eyes fluttered open, he was there. Not as a stranger or a distant observer, but as someone who had been in love with her longer than any absence could erase, someone who understood her fears, her history, and the fragile hope that clung to the edges of her mind. The moment she spoke, barely above a whisper, and recognized him, Andrew felt the world tilt in both relief and sorrow. Her voice, dry and cracked from hours of strain, called his name. Andrew. The single word carried a universe of pain, regret, and trust. He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, letting his thumb trace gentle patterns over her hand. "Welcome back," he murmured, voice low, comforting, anchored in certainty. "How are you feeling?" she asked, confusion clouding her expression. Where is the baby? Is she okay?" His answer was calm, tender, unwavering. "Katie is beautiful, perfect, safe." And in that moment, the reassurance he offered, simple and honest, carried more weight than Vince's absent promises had ever done. Tears escaped Anna's eyes, tracing fragile lines down her temples as relief and lingering sorrow intermingled. She clutched his hand as though it were a lifeline, realizing with painful clarity that the life she thought she had been securing with Vince was a fragile illusion, while the man who had never stopped loving her had been willing to fight, protect, and provide without hesitation. Hours passed in quiet companionship, conversations bridging 5 lost years. Andrew recounted his life in Austin, the business he built, the loneliness he endured, and his reasons for returning. Anna shared the isolation, the disappointment, the hollow pretense that had colored her marriage, and the small, sacred moments she had tried to preserve for herself amidst the neglect. Together, they began to reconstruct a world of trust, intimacy, and shared responsibility, each gesture, word, and touch a brick in a bridge to a future neither had dared imagine before. When he showed her photos and videos of Katie, small miracles of movement and awareness, Anna watched with a heart stretched between grief and wonder. The baby's name, Katie, settled effortlessly, spoken naturally by Andrew and eventually by the nurses, softening the clinical edge of the ICU into a home, a space where care, love, and presence mattered more than legal ties or biology. Na observed, ever the vigilant guide, the quiet miracle of Andrew's devotion. She noted the absence of Vince, the way the child responded to Andrew, the way Anna leaned, trusted, and exhaled a kind of relief that had been impossible under the weight of her husband's indifference. And in that observation, Na understood, as a nurse who had witnessed decades of family triumphs and failures, that some bonds were forged not by DNA but by the consistent, unwavering presence of someone willing to fight for what truly mattered. Andrew, standing sentinel over Anna and Katie, knew that he had assumed a role that transcended the confines of expectation, obligation, or law. He had become their anchor, their protector, their heart in flesh and bone. And as the hours melded into a rhythm of care, vigilance, and tenderness, the stakes of the outside world, Vince, society, judgment, were reduced to whispers and shadows. Here, in this luminous ICU, amid the hum of machines and the quiet dedication of devoted professionals, love, responsibility, and choice converged. He had come back not to reclaim what had been lost, but to build anew, to craft a sanctuary of life, hope, and devotion that would endure far beyond the shadow of neglect or betrayal. The day before Anna's scheduled discharge dawned with pale winter lights streaming through the hospital windows, casting long golden shafts across the pale linoleum floors of the maternity ward, turning the ICU into a sanctuary of quiet hope. Andrew entered the room with the calm authority of a man who had weathered storms and emerged resolute, his presence immediately grounding, stabilizing the air around Anna and Katie. She was seated on the edge of her hospital bed, gently rocking Katie in her arms, the soft rise and fall of the infant's chest a quiet testament to survival, resilience, and the fragile perfection of new life. The afternoon sun caught in Katie's fine hair, creating a halo that made the tiny bundle seem almost ethereal, a living promise of innocence and possibility. Andrew's expression softened, yet carried an edge of seriousness as he crossed the room, the weight of the conversation he knew was coming pressing on his chest like a tangible force. "Annie," he began, voice steady but carrying the gravity that matched her own apprehension, "we need to talk." She sighed, carefully placing Katie into the bassinet, her hands lingering for a moment on the soft blanket that cradled her daughter. She had known this conversation would arrive, had felt it approaching like the inevitability of winter after a long autumn, and yet the anticipation still coiled in her chest, tight and anxious. Andrew paced slightly, restless, the faint scuff of his shoes on the polished floor, marking time in a rhythm dictated by tension and concern. "They're releasing you tomorrow," he began, deliberate, "but your husband, his flight gets in at 3. Discharge ends at 2. Her voice, low and fragile, confirmed his fears. "He called me this morning," she said quietly, "told me to take an Uber or wait for him." Andrew winced visibly, the image of her navigating city streets with a newborn in tow, igniting a flash of anger and disbelief, tempered only by the need to remain composed in front of her. The betrayal was stark, the negligence blatant, and yet his focus remained resolutely on the child, the mother, and the fragile threads of safety and care that he could weave in their stead. He turned to her, the intensity of his gaze softening into earnest inquiry. "Anna, I need to ask you, honestly, do you love him? After everything, after all this, do you still love that man?" She flinched slightly, the words striking a chord she had tried to mute. Katie's father, she reminded herself defensively, as if the biological tie alone could shield her from the chaos of truth. "That's not what I asked," Andrew said firmly, stopping before her, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes, steady, unwavering, carried the weight of 5 years of unspoken devotion and heartbreak. "I know he's the biological father. That's fact. I'm asking about your heart, Anna." Her composure cracked, the years of pretense and guarded silence giving way to raw confession. "What do you want me to say, Andrew?" she whispered, voice thick with exhaustion and guilt. "That I regret it? That I was naive and fell for a flashy smile and empty promises? Of course I do. It's the biggest regret of my life, and I am ashamed of how I treated you." The confession spilled from her lips in a torrent, every word laced with sorrow and relief, an acknowledgement of both past mistakes and present clarity. Vince had once told her, in a rare moment of drunken candor, why he pursued her, to prove a point to win a game of pride and ego. And now, the bitter truth of those words collided with the reality of her life, a husband absent when she had needed him most, a child in her arms, and a man she had never ceased to love, standing quietly, patiently, unwaveringly beside her. Andrew's hand covered hers, a reassuring weight against the tremor of grief and disbelief. Shh, don't be, just rest. You've endured enough. He leaned closer, letting the warmth of his presence seep into her, offering calm and safety where chaos had reigned. And then, gently, a question that bridged heart and hope. Have you thought of a name for your daughter? She shook her head, the tiny weight of Katie in her arms demanding clarity she didn't yet possess. Andrew smiled softly without hesitation, offering the name that had lingered in his heart for years. Katie. I always loved that name, Anna repeated it aloud, savoring the sound, the syllables soft yet profound, a small, luminous moment in the wake of storm and suffering. Katie. The name anchored them to hope, to love, and to the quiet promise of a future that could now be theirs to claim. Over the following days, a rhythm settled into the room. Andrew became the constant presence, arriving each morning before the doctors made their rounds, staying until Anna surrendered to sleep each night, his devotion palpable, steady, unrelenting. He brought food she could enjoy, warming meals and delicate smoothies, magazines and a tablet loaded with films to fill the long hours. He went to the nursery and returned with videos of Katie, recounting her small gestures with the pride of a father discovering a new world. Katie waved today, he announced one morning, eyes alight with a childlike wonder that mirrored Anna's own relief and amazement. The nurse reminded him it was likely a reflex, yet Andrew's insistence was gentle, persuasive, and undeniably touching. The name, once fragile on paper, became tangible through love and attention. Anna watched, heart caught between joy and lingering regret, recognizing in him the man who had always loved her for exactly who she was, and who had never wavered, even when the world seemed determined to interfere. Na, the senior nurse who had overseen Anna's care from the start, observed quietly. Decades of experience had taught her to see the heart of things, and she saw in Andrew a devotion rare and luminous, a presence that made up for every absence and failure Vince had perpetrated. She saw how he adjusted Anna's pillows with care, how he cradled the tiny body of Katie as if it were a sacred trust, how he listened when Anna spoke, really listened, attending to every word, every sigh, every tremor of doubt. And she noted the absence of the actual husband. No calls, no flowers, no concern, nothing to mark the minimal participation that Vince had assumed he could rely on without consequence. Na made a mental note, a small victory in her long career, that sometimes the rules needed bending to protect what truly mattered. The log of communication, the patient's chart, the planned discharge. They were all tools in her careful hands, ensuring that for this young mother and child, negligence would not prevail. Andrew, sensing the tension in the coming discharge, prepared for every contingency. When he spoke with Na about the paperwork and prescriptions, he did so with quiet authority, willing to assume full responsibility, understanding that the legalities of marriage and paternity were secondary to the immediate needs of Anna and Katie. "I'll take them both home," he said simply, decisively, the words carrying the weight of promise, protection, and love. And as he glanced toward the closed door of Anna's room, he allowed himself a moment of hope. That home, for the first time in years, might be where they belonged together, safe and cherished, free from pretense or betrayal. Vince, meanwhile, was oblivious to the tide that had shifted beneath him. He kissed a blonde at the resort, confident in his charm, blind to the consequences of his neglect. Plans were made, casual flippancy masking the world he had abandoned, a world where his wife had nearly died, where a child had arrived, and where his absence had created a vacuum that Andrew had filled without hesitation, without question, without falter. Flowers bought, apologies rehearsed, flights booked. He believed a gesture could replace presence, that charm could replace responsibility. And yet the stark truth awaited him. Anna had chosen, and in choosing, had claimed her life, her child, and her love, irrevocably, with Andrew at the center. When Vince arrived at the hospital, belated, breathless from travel and half-hearted pretense, the reception desk delivered the final blow with quiet professionalism. Anna Hayes had been discharged, already picked up, already safe, already in the care of the man who had never stopped loving her, the man who had shown in action and presence that fatherhood and partnership were measured in commitment, not DNA or empty words. Vince's protests dissolved against the calm authority of the nurses, their professional distance a mirror of the cold, hard truth he had failed to perceive. He had lost, completely, utterly. And it had happened while he played at life, oblivious to the stakes, blind to the devotion that had quietly, persistently claimed victory. The final call was brief, sharp, and definitive. Andrew's voice carried calm, lethal authority across the line. "The game's over, Vince. Don't call her again. She's with me now." The line went dead. In his Porsche, Vince stared at the cracked screen of his phone, the wilting bouquet, the car seat beside him, and the emptiness of a house that had never been a home in the first place. Outside, snow flurries danced, a silent witness to the end of arrogance and the quiet triumph of steadfast love. He had lost, yes, but more than that. He had never even realized the rules of the game he thought he controlled had already been rewritten. And in the warmth of a private home somewhere in Chicago, Andrew Cole, Anna Hayes, and Katie, safe, loved, and unbroken, stepped forward into a life defined not by neglect, betrayal, or chance, but by care, devotion, and the enduring power of a heart that had never stopped believing in them.